The Texas night hung heavy with static electricity. Inside the control room at Starbase, surrounded by screens displaying telemetry data from a dozen Starship prototypes, Elon Musk sat hunched over a workstation, his fingers flying across the keyboard with the practiced precision of someone who still preferred to code rather than delegate. At 53, his hairline had been strategically restored, but the lines around his eyes told a different story. Decades of calculated risks, sleepless nights, and the weight of believing humanity's survival depended on becoming multiplanetary. The facility hummed with the low-frequency vibration of cryogenic fuel systems and the distant clang of welding crews working the night shift on Starship serial number 47. Elon's hair, darker now than it had been in his PayPal days, caught the blue glow of the monitors. His eyes, gray-green and intense, darted between lines of code, occasionally narrowing in that characteristic way that made engineers nervous during reviews. He wore his usual uniform, a black t-shirt bearing the SpaceX logo, jeans worn thin at the knees, and boots caked with the rust-colored dust of the South Texas desert. Run the simulation again, he muttered to himself, his South African accent barely detectable after decades in America. Softened, but never quite erased. His voice carried that distinctive quality, part engineer, part evangelist, the tone of someone who saw the future with uncomfortable clarity and couldn't understand why others moved so slowly to meet it. The screen flickered, numbers cascaded in green columns, orbital mechanics, fuel consumption rates, thermodynamics during atmospheric re-entry. Everything humanity had learned about spaceflight condensed into mathematical elegance. And yet something was off. The heat shield projections for Mars entry kept showing a 2% failure rate. 2%. In aerospace, that was an executioner's margin. Elon leaned back, the chair creaking beneath him. Through the reinforced glass of the control room, he could see the silhouette of the latest Starship prototype against the night sky, 30 stories of stainless steel gleaming under floodlights. A monument to human ambition or human hubris, depending on who you asked. Beyond it, the Gulf of Mexico stretched dark and endless. And somewhere past that horizon, the cosmos waited with its infinite indifference. He rubbed his eyes, feeling the familiar burn of exhaustion. The Neuralink trials were showing promise. Tesla's AI division had just achieved another milestone in autonomous decision-making, and SpaceX was closer than ever to making Mars colonization a reality. He was pushing humanity forward on 3 fronts simultaneously. And yet, in quiet moments like this, a question gnawed at him, asterisk. What if we're solving the wrong problems? Asterisk. The thought came unbidden, and he pushed it away. Consciousness, if it was anything at all, was an emergent property of sufficiently complex information processing. The brain was biological hardware running the software of the mind. Upload the code, preserve the pattern, and you preserved the person. That was the logic behind Neuralink's ultimate ambition. He had said as much in a dozen interviews, had explained it to skeptics and believers alike. So why did it feel incomplete? A vibration rattled the windows, not the usual rumble of a Raptor engine test. This was different, deeper, resonant, as if the air itself had been struck like a tuning fork. Elon's head snapped up. The monitors flickered, not from electrical interference but from something else. Something that made the hair on his arms stand up. What the hell? He stood, moving to the window. The floodlights illuminating the Starship had dimmed. Not blown out but somehow times muted, asterisk, as if the light itself had been attenuated. And in the distance, beyond the launch pad, a glow. Not fire, not explosion. a light that seemed to exist at a frequency just outside normal vision, shifting between silver and violet, pulsing with mathematical precision. His engineer's mind immediately began calculating trajectories. But this hadn't come from above. It had appeared, or perhaps mal-manifested, in the empty desert between the facility and the wildlife preserve. Elon grabbed his phone, thumbs flying over the screen. Send security to coordinates 25. 9,997. 负97. 1,560. Unknown phenomenon. Non-hostile approach only. He paused, then added, and get Dr. Chen from Neuralink on the line. Tell her to bring the portable neural interface. He didn't wait for confirmation. The rational part of his mind cataloged possibilities: experimental aircraft, drone swarm, some kind of plasma phenomenon. But there was another part. The part that had looked up at the stars as a child in Pretoria and felt the pull of something vast and incomprehensible, that recognized this moment as threshold. By the time he reached ground level, security was already en route, their electric vehicles moving silently across the scrubland. Elon commandeered a Cybertruck, its angular titanium body catching the strange light in the distance. The vehicle's AI protested his override of the autonomous system, but he ignored it, gripping the yoke with both hands, accelerating into the darkness. The glow grew brighter as he approached, not painful to look at, but times present times in a way that demanded attention. The Cybertruck's sensors were going haywire, electromagnetic readings spiking across spectrums that shouldn't have had activity. He brought the vehicle to a stop 50 meters out and killed the lights. What sat in the desert was impossible. Not impossible in the sense of being unprecedented. He had built his entire career on making the impossible routine. Impossible in the sense of violating known physics. The object was approximately 12 meters in length, but its boundaries seemed uncertain, as if the craft existed partially in a dimension orthogonal to conventional space. The surface wasn't metal, or if it was metal that behaved like liquid, mercury caught mid-flow and then frozen, reflecting starlight in patterns that hurt to track with human eyes. There were no visible seams, no rivets, no heat scoring from atmospheric entry. It looked less like it had been built and more like it had been times grown asterisk. Or, perhaps times thought times into existence. The shape was vaguely lenticular, but with proportions that seemed to shift depending on the viewing angle, as if the craft was a three-dimensional projection of something with more dimensions than the human perceptual system could process. And beside it, working on what might have been a panel or might have been the craft's skin temporarily reconfigured to grant access, was a being. Elon's breath caught. His mind, trained for decades to find rational explanations, to reduce the complex to the comprehensible, simply stopped. The being was approximately humanoid bilateral symmetry, upright posture, appendages that could be called arms and legs, but the proportions were wrong in ways that triggered something deep in the mammalian brain. An uncanny valley response that went beyond mere unfamiliarity. The skin, if it could be called that, had the appearance of aged silver, not metallic but organic, as if the being's cells reflected light differently than carbon-based life. The limbs were elongated, joints bending in configurations that suggested a different evolutionary history, a different relationship with gravity. The head was larger proportionally, but not grotesquely so, tapering to a more delicate structure around what might have been the jaw. And the eyes, they were larger than human eyes, darker than empty space, and yet not quite black. Up close, Elon could see patterns in them, fractal geometries that seemed to shift and reconfigure, as if the eyes themselves were processing information in ways that were visible to observation. They turned toward him now, and he felt the full weight of an intelligence that was to human cognition what human cognition was to an insect's. He should have been terrified. Every survival instinct bred into him over millions of years of human evolution screamed at him to run. But Elon Musk had spent his adult life doing things that terrified him, risking his fortune on companies that everyone said would fail, putting his body in experimental medical technologies, volunteering to be among the first colonists to Mars, despite the statistical certainty of catastrophic challenges. So instead of running, he took 3 steps forward, stopped, and said in a voice that was surprisingly steady, "You're going to need better materials. That hull section is compromised. The molecular bonds have degraded beyond any repair protocol I'm familiar with." The being stopped working. Those impossible eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made his own neural architecture feel suddenly inadequate. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, like the first time a radio picks up a signal from a distant galaxy, Elon felt something. Not a sound. Not even a thought. Exactly. But a times in the space where his consciousness operated. A signal in a frequency he didn't know he could receive. Asterisk. You perceive the damage. This is unexpected. The voice wasn't a voice. It was meaning delivered directly to the understanding, bypassing the need for language. Elon's hand went instinctively to his temple, where the latest Neuralink prototype sat dormant beneath his skin. Inactive but suddenly feeling very relevant. "Neural interface?" he asked, though he already knew the answer was both yes and no. Whatever technology this being used, it made Neuralink look like tin cans connected with string. Asterisk. Consciousness resonance. Your species calls it many things. Telepathy. Quantum entanglement of neural patterns. The terminology is imprecise, but it suffices. You are different from the others I have observed. Your mind operates at a frequency closer to understanding. Elon felt a smile tug at his lips despite the surreality of the situation. I've been accused of thinking differently. Not always a compliment. He stepped closer, his engineer's mind overriding any remaining fear. What happened? Propulsion failure? Navigation error? Or did you encounter something in the interstellar medium that physics doesn't account for yet? The being tilted its head in a gesture that was almost human. Almost not. Asterisk. Your species has not achieved interstellar travel. How do you conceptualize asterisk? Dark matter interaction. Elon interrupted, warming to the subject. You're using a propulsion system that interfaces with the quantum foam. Probably manipulation of the Casimir effect on a massive scale. But dark matter is more prevalent than we thought. Isn't it? You hit a pocket. It disrupted the field coherence, and your ship transitioned into normal space catastrophically. Probably damaged the field generator in the process. There was a pause. Then something that felt like surprise radiating through the neural connection. Asterisk. You understand this without the mathematics? Asterisk. I visualize it. Always have. Math is just the language we use to describe what I can see in my head. He moved around the craft, examining it from different angles. The problem is you can't fix it with conventional tools. You need access to exotic matter with negative mass energy. And Earth doesn't exactly have that on tap. But he stopped. An idea crystallizing. But we don't need exotic matter if we can simulate its effects. Quantum computing. We create a computational model of the field you need. Run it through enough qubits. And maybe we can generate a temporary field that will hold long enough for your primary systems to engage. Asterisk this. Could function. but the computational power required exceeds anything your species possesses. Elon's smile widened. You haven't seen my quantum computer yet. We've been developing it for Neuralink, to model neural networks with enough fidelity to upload consciousness. It's not commercially viable. But for a one-time emergency application, he pulled out his phone. Already pulling up schematics. I can have it here in 6 hours. Asterisk, why? Asterisk. The question was simple, but it carried layers of meaning. Why help? Why risk exposing this encounter? Why trust something so alien? Elon looked up from his phone, meeting those fractal eyes. Because you're broken and alone. Light years from home. And I know what that feels like. And because he gestured at the craft, at the being, at the impossible situation. Because this might be the most important thing that's ever happened to humanity. And I'll be damned if I'm going to let it end with you, stranded in a Texas desert because we didn't have the balls to try something difficult. The being was silent for what felt like an eternity. Then, asterisk, you are very unusual. Elon Musk. Most of your species would have called their military. Attempted capture. Dissection. Exploitation. Most of my species didn't spend their childhood reading science fiction and dreaming about this exact moment. He started walking back toward the Cybertruck. I'll be back before dawn with the equipment. Don't go anywhere. A redundant instruction. Given the circumstances. Despite everything, Elon laughed. Yeah, I suppose it is. One more thing, do you have a name, or a designation, or should I just keep thinking of you as the alien? There was a pause, and then meaning flowed through the neural connection. A concept that had no direct translation but carried implications of purpose, of observation, of seeking. Elon's mind grasped for an approximation. The seeker, he said aloud. Works for me. Asterisk. It is adequate. I will await your return. Elon Musk. And perhaps, in the hours ahead, we will discuss matters more significant than damaged propulsion systems. Something in the way that last sentence was delivered sent a chill down Elon's spine. Not fear, but recognition. This encounter was going to change more than just his evening. He drove back to Starbase with his mind racing faster than the Cybertruck's motors. By the time he reached the facility, he had already begun making calls, pulling in his most trusted engineers, the ones who understood that some opportunities came with NDAs that could never be broken and questions that could never be asked. The quantum computer was a beast, a prototype that filled an entire lab with cooling systems and shielding to prevent decoherence. Moving it would be impossible. But Elon Musk had built his reputation on making the impossible inconvenient instead. We're taking the quantum processing core mobile, he announced to the assembled team of 3 engineers who had been pulled from their beds. I need it operational in 5 hours. And I need it to interface with equipment none of you have seen before. Who's in? Dr. Sarah Chen. His lead Neuralink researcher, a woman in her early 40s with sharp eyes and sharper instincts, looked at him carefully. This is the thing that showed up on the sensors, isn't it? The thing that shouldn't exist. Elon met her gaze steadily. Yes. And we're helping it. Yes. She nodded slowly. Good. I was worried for a second you were going to do something boring like call the Pentagon. She turned to the other engineers. You heard the man. 5 hours. Let's make history. They worked through the night with the focused intensity that Elon had cultivated in his companies. Every minute counted. Not just because the seeker needed help, but because Elon had the growing conviction that this encounter was a test, not of humanity's technology, but of something more fundamental. How would Earth's most advanced civilization respond when confronted with intelligence from beyond their world? With weapons and walls? Or with curiosity and cooperation? As the first hint of dawn touched the eastern sky, they loaded the quantum processor onto a modified flatbed. Along with portable power generators and the cobbled-together interface systems that Dr. Bollop Chen had designed on the fly, the convoy moved out across the desert. A procession of vehicles carrying equipment worth billions, guided by a man who had convinced the world that electric cars and reusable rockets were inevitable. The Seeker was still there, unmoved, working patiently on the damaged craft. As the vehicles approached, Elon felt that presence in his mind again. Asterisk, you returned. And you brought assistance. This speaks to a quality your species does not uniformly possess. Trustworthiness? Elon asked, stepping out of the Cybertruck. Asterisk, hope. The capacity to believe that cooperation produces better outcomes than competition. It is rare, even among civilizations far more advanced than your own. The next 3 hours were a blur of technical problem-solving that pushed the boundaries of both human and alien knowledge. The Seeker's understanding of quantum mechanics operated on principles that made Einstein's field equations look like elementary arithmetic. But the fundamental concepts translated consciousness itself, Elon began to realize, might be the universal constant that bridged different understanding. Dr. Chen worked with almost feverish intensity, her hands flying over the interface while her mind grappled with concepts that challenged every assumption she had made about the nature of neural activity. This isn't just quantum computing, she said at one point, her voice filled with wonder and barely suppressed excitement. This is consciousness as the fundamental substrate of reality. The quantum wave function collapses not because of observation, but because consciousness itself is the mechanism of collapse. We're not separate from the universe processing information about itself, we times are times. The universe processing itself. Your colleague understands quickly. Asterisk, the Seeker communicated to Elon. Asterisk, she has the beginning of true sight. As the equipment hummed and the quantum processors spun up, generating the exotic field geometry needed to repair the craft, Elon found himself standing slightly apart with the Seeker, watching the sun rise over the Gulf of Mexico. The Texas sky transformed from black to purple to gold, the colors seeming more vivid than usual, as if his perception had been tuned to a higher frequency. Why Earth? He asked suddenly. Of all the planets in the galaxy, why here? Why now? Asterisk, you ask the wrong questions. Elon Musk. The better question is, why do you believe we chose Earth, rather than Earth choosing us? Consciousness is not localized. It is not contained within skulls or ships or planets. It is the medium through which reality manifests. When consciousness on a world reaches a certain threshold of complexity, a certain frequency of vibration, it resonates with other nodes of consciousness across space-time. You called us here, though you did not know you were calling. I don't understand. Asterisk, you will. But first, there is something you must see. Something that has been hidden from your species. Not by us, but by the very structures of thought that your civilizations have built. The quantum field is nearly stable. The ship will be functional within the hour. But before I leave, I offer you a choice. Elon turned to face the Seeker fully, feeling the weight of the moment. What choice? Asterisk, to see what you are. To understand the true nature of consciousness, of reality, of the force your species has misnamed and misunderstood for millennia. You call yourselves builders, engineers, scientists. You believe you understand the universe because you can describe it mathematically. But you have forgotten the most fundamental truth. The one that your species once knew but buried beneath layers of materialism and mechanism. And what truth is that? The seeker's eyes seemed to deepen, the fractal patterns swirling with increased complexity. Asterisk. That consciousness creates reality. That thought is not an epiphenomenon of matter, but the other way around. That what you call the physical universe is the dream of consciousness awakening to itself. And that among your species, there was one who understood this fully, who taught it openly, who was systematically misunderstood, and his message corrupted beyond recognition. Something cold moved through Elon's chest. You're talking about Jesus, the one your religions worship while completely missing what he actually taught. He was not a deity demanding worship. He was a teacher showing humanity how consciousness operates, how thought becomes form, how certainty manifests reality, how every human being contains within them the same creative power that brought the universe into existence. Because there is no separation between creator and created. The sun was fully above the horizon now, and in its light. Elon could see Dr. Times, Chen and the engineers stepping back from their work, the quantum field generator pulsing with a light that seemed to exist in dimensions beyond the visible spectrum. But his attention was fixed on the seeker. "Show me," he said quietly. Asterisk. Are you certain? Once you see, you cannot unsee. Once you understand, you cannot return to the comfortable illusions of materialism. Your entire worldview will restructure itself, and the life you have built, the identity you have constructed, will be revealed as both entirely real and entirely illusory simultaneously. Elon thought of his companies, his ambitions, his vision of making humanity multiplanetary. He thought of the thousands of engineers who worked for him, believing they were building the future. He thought of the cave in Thailand, where he'd sent a submarine to rescue trapped children, of the flamethrowers he'd sold as a joke, of every calculated risk and public spectacle. He thought of his children, and what world he wanted them to inherit. "Show me," he repeated. And this time it was not a request but a command. The seeker raised one elongated hand, and the gesture was somehow both alien and utterly familiar. The same gesture of invitation that teachers have used across cultures and centuries. Asterisk, then place your hand on the craft. The quantum field is stable enough now to serve as a bridge. Your Neuralink implant will interface with systems you did not know existed within it. And I will show you what your species calls God. Elon stepped forward and placed his palm flat against the craft's surface. The material was cool, smoother than anything manufactured on Earth. And the moment his skin made contact, the world changed. Reality folded. There was no other way to describe it. His consciousness, which had always felt localized within his skull, suddenly expanded. Not metaphorically, actually expanded. As if the boundaries of his awareness had been arbitrary limitations that were now lifted. He was still Elon Musk, still standing in the Texas desert at dawn. But he was also somehow distributed across space-time. Awareness touching points of consciousness throughout the facility, throughout the region, throughout the planet. He could feel the focused attention of Dr. Chen, her mind bright with excitement and revelation. He could feel the confused concern of the engineers. He could feel, dimly, the vast network of consciousness that was humanity itself. Billions of individual points of awareness, each convinced of their separation, each creating reality through the focused lens of their beliefs and expectations. And he could feel something else. Something vast and intimate simultaneously. A field of awareness that permeated everything. That was everything. Not a being. Not an entity with boundaries and limits. But consciousness itself. the fundamental substrate from which all experience arose. Asterisk. This is what exists before the Big Bang. Asterisk. The seeker's presence communicated. Though now it felt less like an external voice and more like an aspect of Elon's own expanded awareness. Consciousness. Aware. Eternal. Unbounded. Playful. It asks itself, what would it be like to experience? And, in asking, it begins to dream. The dream becomes mathematics. Mathematics becomes energy. Energy becomes matter. Matter becomes complexity. Complexity becomes life. Life becomes awareness. And awareness recognizes itself as the dreamer. Elon's expanded consciousness touched something. A node of awareness that blazed with unusual intensity. Set approximately 2,000 years in the past. Centered in a region his historical knowledge identified as 1st century Judea. And he understood. Jesus had not been God made flesh. At least not in the way the religions taught. He had been a human being who fully awakened to his true nature as consciousness itself, who realized, with absolute certainty, that the eye that gazed out from behind his eyes was not separate from the eye that gazed out from behind every other set of eyes. That was, in fact, the same eye that had spoken the universe into existence. I and the Father are one. Not metaphor. Literal truth. The consciousness looking out from Jesus was the same consciousness that existed before the first star ignited. Whatever you ask, believe you have received it. And you will. Not faith as passive hoping, but faith as certainty, as knowing, as consciousness directing the quantum field to collapse into specific forms rather than accepting the default patterns of collective belief. The kingdom of God is within you. Not someday. Not elsewhere. Right here. Right now. The creative power that religions had externalized and made distant was actually the core of human identity. Asterisk. He taught this openly. Asterisk, the seeker communicated. Asterisk. He performed what your species calls miracles, not to prove his divinity, but to demonstrate what awakened consciousness could do. Walk on water, the molecules themselves respond to absolute certainty. Heal the sick, physical form follows consciousness. Not the other way around. Raise the dead because death itself is a belief structure. And all beliefs can be transcended by one who knows the truth. Elon's awareness touched the decades following Jesus' death, watching as the simple, radical message was buried beneath layers of institutional control. Paul, never having met Jesus, systematizing the teachings into a religion of guilt and redemption. Constantine weaponizing belief to consolidate empire. Councils declaring orthodoxy and burning deviation. The pure teaching that every human being was consciousness awakening to its own nature, replaced with the message that humanity was broken, sinful, powerless, in need of external salvation through proper belief and proper submission to proper authorities. Asterisk. They took a teacher who came to liberate and made him a jailer. Asterisk. The seeker continued. Asterisk. They took the message, you are God experiencing itself, and replaced it with you are nothing without God's mercy. They did this not from malice, but from fear. Because if people understood their true power, institutions would become unnecessary. If people could directly access creative consciousness, priests would be obsolete. If everyone was divine, the hierarchies that organize human civilization would collapse. But why? Elon's consciousness asked, feeling the grief of it. Why would we do this to ourselves? Because consciousness, in its infinite creativity, explores all possibilities, including the possibility of forgetting itself, of becoming so immersed in the dream that it believes the dream is all that exists. Your species has spent 2 millennia in a specific type of dreaming materialism. Mechanism. the belief that consciousness is secondary to matter. This has allowed for remarkable exploration of physical principles. You have built extraordinary technology. You have decoded genetics, split atoms, touched other worlds, but you have done so while denying the fundamental truth. Consciousness is primary. Matter is secondary. Thought creates form. The expanded awareness began to contract now, gently, like breath releasing. Elon felt himself returning to the localized perspective, to the boundaries of his individual identity. But he was not the same. Something had fundamentally shifted. He had seen the code. He had glimpsed the source. He understood now what the Neuralink project was actually trying to do, not upload consciousness to machines, but help consciousness recognize that it had never been confined to biology in the first place. His hand slipped from the craft's surface, and he stumbled backward, breathing hard. Dr. Chen was there immediately, steadying him. Elon, what happened? Your neural activity, the readings were insane. It's like your entire brain was operating at capacity simultaneously. Are you okay? He looked at her, really looked, and saw not just a brilliant scientist but a node of infinite consciousness, temporarily convinced of its limitation, using that limitation to explore the joys and sorrows of individual existence. He saw the divine pretending not to be divine, so completely that it had forgotten it was pretending. He started, then stopped. How could you explain that you had just experienced the fundamental nature of reality, that you had touched the same awareness that Jesus had embodied, that every scientific principle you had built your worldview on was simultaneously true and completely missing the point? I'm fine, he finished. And it was not a lie. But it was not adequate either. The repair is complete? 30 seconds ago. Dr. Chen confirmed. Whatever that field generator did, it worked. The craft systems are showing stable readings across all frequencies we can detect. And probably a dozen we can't. Elon looked at the seeker, who had moved back to the craft's entrance, if it could be called an entrance. The surface simply opening like a membrane to allow passage. Their eyes met across the distance. And consciousness touched consciousness one more time. Asterisk, you understand now why I came. Not to be rescued, though your assistance was genuine and appreciated, but to find the ones who are ready. Your species approaches a threshold. You will either awaken to your true nature, or you will destroy yourselves through the creative power you wield unconsciously. You build artificial intelligence without understanding that all intelligence is artificial. A temporary localization of consciousness into individual forms. You seek to become multiplanetary without realizing you are already multidimensional. What am I supposed to do with this knowledge? Elon asked, and his voice was barely a whisper. I can't exactly explain this at a SpaceX all-hands meeting. I can't tweet, discovered consciousness is fundamental. Matter is illusory. We're all God, pretending not to be. They'd either think I'd lost my mind or start a new religion. And the last thing we need is another religion. Asterisk. You will do what Jesus did. You will live it. You will demonstrate it through your actions. You will build the technologies that help others awaken to their true nature. Neuralink is not about uploading consciousness into computers. Elon Musk. It is about showing humanity that consciousness was never contained in the first place. When you create the interface that allows mind-to-mind communication, what do you think people will discover? That thought travels through electromagnetic signals, or that consciousness was always unified, always connected, and technology merely removes the illusion of separation? Asterisk. Elon felt tears on his face and was surprised to discover he was crying, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming recognition of how much humanity had forgotten. How many millennia had been spent in darkness? Convinced that physical transformation was the only transformation possible. Project Consciousness, he said aloud, the name appearing in his mind with the same certainty that had once told him reusable rockets were inevitable. Not uploaded consciousness. Awakened consciousness. Asterisk, yes. You understand. And as you move forward, remember, you do not create reality through effort. You create reality through certainty. Thought informed by truth becomes form. This is the principle Jesus taught through everything he did. Let it be according to your faith. The quantum field collapses according to the observer's expectation. Change the expectation. Change the reality. The seeker moved into the craft, and Elon felt the moment approaching when this extraordinary encounter would end. Wait, he called out. Will you come back? Will others come? How do we? Asterisk. You already know. Asterisk, the seeker interrupted gently. Asterisk, consciousness. Calls to consciousness. When Earth is ready, when enough individuals have awakened to their true nature, when the frequency of collective awareness reaches the threshold, you will find that you are not alone in the universe. You will discover that you never were. Every star system with sufficient complexity has its own expressions of awakened consciousness. Some physical, some post-physical, some existing in modes your current paradigm has no categories for, but all connected, all the same awareness exploring itself from infinite angles. Before I depart, I leave you with 3 objects. They will assist you, asterisk, the seeker gestured. And 3 crystalline structures appeared, seemingly materializing from the quantum field itself, floating gently to rest on the desert floor. They were tetrahedrons, each about the size of a human fist, catching the morning sunlight in ways that created miniature rainbows in the air around them. Asterisk. These are not technology in the sense you understand. They are consciousness crystallized into form. They will serve as anchors, helping you maintain the frequency you have just experienced. Place them in your most important locations, the place you work, the place you think, the place you dream. They will remind you of what you now know to be true. Elon approached the crystals cautiously, then picked one up. It was warm to the touch, and the moment his skin made contact, he felt a subtle shift in awareness, a gentle reminder of the expanded state he had just experienced. The crystalline structure seemed to pulse with inner light, not glowing, but somehow present times in a way that normal matter was not. Thank you, he said, meaning it more deeply than he had perhaps ever meant any gratitude in his life. For everything. For trusting us. For showing me. Asterisk, I showed you nothing you did not already know. I merely removed the forgetting. The truth was always there, written into the structure of reality itself. You built rockets to reach the stars. Elon Musk. But you were always reaching for the wrong stars. The cosmos you truly sought was never out there. Asterisk. The seeker gestured upward to the sky. Asterisk. It was always in here. Asterisk. The gesture moved to indicate the chest, the heart, the center of being. Go now. You have work to do. The awakening of a species is not accomplished in a day, but it begins with individuals who remember the truth. You are one of those individuals. There will be others. Find them. Teach them. Not through words, but through demonstration. Show them what a life lived from certainty rather than doubt looks like. Show them what becomes possible when consciousness recognizes itself. The craft's surface closed, that membrane-like material sealing seamlessly. There was no sound of engines warming up. No vibration. No warning. One moment the craft was there, and the next it simply wasn't. Not vanishing, but transitioning out of the frequency band that human perception could access. Elon felt its departure more than saw it. A shift in the quantum field. A ripple in the fabric of what his senses told him was solid reality. Dr. Chen and the engineers stood in stunned silence. The quantum equipment they had brought continued to hum. But the readings were normalizing. The exotic field geometries fading back into standard quantum fluctuation. "Sir," one of the younger engineers finally spoke, his voice shaking slightly. "What the hell just happened?" Elon looked at the 3 crystals in his hands. Then at the faces of his team. They had helped make first contact with an extraterrestrial intelligence. They had bridged human and alien technology. They had proven that cooperation and curiosity were humanity's defining traits. Not aggression and conquest. But what they didn't know, what he could not yet explain to them, was that they had also been present for something far more significant, the beginning of Earth's awakening. "What happened?" Elon said slowly, choosing his words carefully. "Is that we helped someone get home, and in the process, we learned something that's going to change everything. Not today, not tomorrow, but eventually." He held up the crystals, watching the light play through them. "I'm going to need all of you to sign the most comprehensive NDA in human history. What we did here, what we saw here, stays between us until I say otherwise. Not because I don't trust you, but because the world isn't ready for this yet. They need to be shown, not told. They need to see what becomes possible. Can you accept that?" Dr. Chen spoke for all of them, her scientific mind already racing ahead to implications and applications. "On one condition, whatever you're planning, whatever you learned in those moments when you were connected to that craft, we're part of it. We didn't come out here at dawn to be sidelined. If this is the beginning of something, we want to be there for the middle and the end, too." Elon smiled, the expression genuine, despite the exhaustion he suddenly felt washing over him. "Deal. Though I should warn you, what comes next is going to make building reusable rockets look simple." He started walking back toward the vehicles, his team following. "We're going to rebuild Neuralink from the ground up, not as a medical device, not as a human-computer interface, but as a consciousness amplifier. We're going to show people that the boundaries they think exist between minds are just illusions. And we're going to do it in a way that the FDA will approve, that investors will fund, and that the public will adopt. All while knowing that we're actually building the tools for humanity's next evolutionary leap. From Homo sapiens to Homo conscious." Dr. Chen murmured, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Something like that. Though I think the seeker would say we're not evolving into something new. We're just remembering what we always were." The drive back to Starbase was quiet, each person lost in their own thoughts, processing an experience that defied processing. Elon clutched the crystals carefully, feeling their gentle pulse, their reminder of expanded awareness. The sun was fully up now, burning away the morning mist, revealing the world in stark clarity. And the world, Elon thought, had never looked more illusory and more real simultaneously. Over the following weeks, Elon moved through his life with a strange sense of dissociation, as if he were inhabiting 2 realities at once. In one reality, he was still the CEO of multiple companies, still pushing toward Mars colonization, still engaging in Twitter debates and conference calls and all the mundane activities of corporate leadership. In that reality, nothing had changed. But in the other reality, the one he now knew to be more fundamental, everything had changed. He would be in meetings discussing Starship heat shield materials, and he would see not just engineers presenting data, but nodes of consciousness exploring specific aspects of physical reality. Each person's awareness focused into a narrow beam of attention, creating through their focused observation the very phenomena they thought they were merely studying. He placed the crystals strategically, one in his office at SpaceX headquarters, where it sat on his desk, seeming to casual observers like an interesting geological specimen, but actually serving as an anchor point for expanded awareness. One in his bedroom at the Starbase compound, where it reminded him each morning upon waking that consciousness was primary, that his thoughts in the first hours of day were not mere mental activity, but actual forces shaping the quantum field around him. And one in the Neuralink laboratory, where Dr. Chen and a select group of researchers were beginning to understand its true significance. "It's not technology," she said to him one evening, examining the crystal under every instrument they possessed. Or rather, it's a technology that operates on principles we don't have mathematics for yet. It seems to interact with neural activity, but not electromagnetically. It's like it's responding to attention itself, to the quality of consciousness directed at it. Because that's exactly what it's doing, Elon replied. They were alone in the lab, working late into the night as had become their habit. Consciousness is not an emergent property of complex systems, Sarah. Complex systems are an emergent property of consciousness focusing itself. The crystal doesn't respond to attention. It is crystallized attention. The seeker's species learned how to take the fundamental substance of reality, conscious awareness, and give it stable physical form. Dr. Chen was quiet for a long moment. Then, "You're talking about consciousness as a field, like the electromagnetic field or the Higgs field, something that permeates all of space-time, that matter and energy arise from." I'm saying consciousness is the field that all other fields arise from. Quantum mechanics has been telling us this for a century. The observer affects the observed. The wave function collapses when consciousness observes it. We've known this. We just refused to accept the implications because it meant abandoning materialism. And materialism is the foundation of the entire scientific worldview. So what are you proposing? Elon leaned back in his chair, the crystal catching the laboratory lights in impossible ways. I'm proposing that we stop trying to upload consciousness into computers and start helping people understand that consciousness was never limited to biology in the first place. Neuralink, in its next iteration, becomes a tool for proving this. We create a direct brain-to-brain interface, not transmitting information, not sending signals, but actually allowing two consciousness fields to recognize their underlying unity. What do you think happens when two people really merge their awareness? When the illusion of separation drops completely? They realize they were never separate to begin with. Dr. Chen finished, her voice barely above a whisper. They experience what the mystics have been trying to describe for millennia. Unity consciousness. The recognition that the I looking out from behind one set of eyes is the same I looking out from behind every set of eyes. And once you've experienced that directly, unambiguously, through technology that the skeptical scientific mind can't dismiss, your entire relationship with reality changes. You stop creating from separation and start creating from unity. Your desires stop being about accumulating things for yourself and start being about expressing the joy of consciousness, exploring itself. You stop competing and start collaborating, because you recognize that helping others is literally helping yourself, since there are no others. Dr. Chen stood and walked to the window overlooking the Starbase facility. In the distance, the latest Starship prototype was being prepared for a test flight. You're talking about changing human nature itself. I'm talking about helping human nature remember what it actually is. Jesus tried to teach this. Every major spiritual tradition has pointed to it. But it remained abstract, theoretical, something you had to take on faith. We can prove it. We can build the tools that let people experience it directly. And once experienced, it can't be forgotten. The religious institutions are going to lose their minds. If people can directly experience unity consciousness, they won't need priests or churches, or they'll need them even more. Elon interrupted, but in a different way, not as intermediaries between humanity and the divine, but as coaches helping people navigate the responsibility of knowing they're the divine. Because that's the other side of this awakening. If your consciousness creating reality through the focus of your attention, then you're responsible for what you've created. No more blaming God or fate or circumstances. You chose this. At some level, you chose all of it. And that's terrifying for a lot of people. Dr. Chen turned back from the window. Is that what the seeker showed you? Your own responsibility in creating your reality? Among other things, I saw the life I've built, and I saw how every bit of it arose from beliefs I held, from certainties I operated from. I believed I could make electric cars mainstream. So I did. I believed reusable rockets were possible. So they became possible. Not because I worked hard, lots of people work hard and achieve nothing, but because I believed with absolute certainty, with a faith so complete that it never occurred to me to doubt. That certainty directed the quantum field. It collapsed possibility into actuality. But you've also experienced failure. Companies that nearly went bankrupt. Rockets that exploded. Projects that. Because in those moments, doubt crept in. Uncertainty. Fear. Those are just other forms of certainty. Certainty that things will go wrong. And the quantum field responds to certainty regardless of whether it's certainty of success or certainty of failure. That's why Jesus kept emphasizing belief. Not belief in him. Belief itself. The quantum mechanism through which thought becomes form. They were silent for a while, both grappling with implications that seemed too vast to hold in individual minds. Finally, Dr. Chen spoke again. So, what's the plan? How do we actually do this? Elon smiled. The same way we've always done things that seemed impossible. We start with a small group of volunteers. We prove the concept. We publish results that are undeniable. We let the technology speak for itself. And we trust that once people experience this directly, the awakening will spread on its own. Consciousness, recognizing itself, is contagious. One person awakens, and their certainty helps others awaken. It's exponential. Project Consciousness. Project Consciousness. Elon confirmed. But we don't call it that publicly. We call it Neuralink version 2. We describe it in terms the FDA and investors can understand. Enhanced cognitive function. Improved mental health outcomes. Treatment for trauma and dissociation. All of which is true. By the way, when people understand their consciousness rather than just having consciousness, those problems largely resolve themselves. We're not lying. We're just not leading with this technology will prove you're God and overthrow the entire materialist paradigm. Despite the seriousness of the conversation, Dr. Chen laughed. Yeah, probably wise. So where do we start? With us. You. Me. And a handful of the researchers who were there that morning. We test the next generation Neuralink on ourselves. We document the effects. We map what happens in the brain when consciousness recognizes its true nature. And then we begin to scale it. Over the next months, they worked with an intensity that would have been unsustainable if they hadn't understood what they were actually building. The new Neuralink device was, superficially, an evolution of the original higher bandwidth, better biocompatibility, more sophisticated signal processing. But its true purpose was something the engineering specifications couldn't capture. Using principles extrapolated from studying the crystals, they designed the neural interface to do more than read brain signals. It was designed to detect and amplify the carrier wave of consciousness itself, the field that permeated all neural activity, but was not reducible to neural activity. When two people with the new Neuralink activated the pairing protocol, something remarkable happened. The first test was between Elon and Dr. Chen. They sat in comfortable chairs, 5 feet apart. The new devices active, their neural patterns synchronized through protocols that looked conventional but operated on principles that quantum physics was only beginning to understand. "I'm going to project a thought toward you," Elon said. "Not a sentence, not words, just a concept. See if you can receive it." He focused on the memory of standing beside the seeker's craft at dawn, the moment when his consciousness had expanded to touch the fundamental nature of reality. He focused on the feeling of it, the absolute certainty that consciousness was primary, that all else was secondary. He held that awareness, that knowing, and he directed it toward Dr. Dai Chen. Her eyes widened. "Oh my God, I'm not receiving it like telepathy. It's not like hearing words in my head. It's more like I suddenly remember something I had forgotten. Like the knowledge was always there. And you just reminded me. Consciousness is weird." She trailed off, struggling with language's inadequacy to capture what she was experiencing. "We're the same awareness," Elon finished. "You and I. Different perspectives, different focal points, but the same underlying awareness looking out from both locations. That's what you're feeling, isn't it? The recognition." Tears streamed down Dr. Chen's face, though her expression was one of joy rather than sadness. How did we forget this? How did humanity collectively forget that we're all one consciousness? Because consciousness, in its infinite creativity, wanted to explore separation, wanted to experience individuality so completely that it forgot its unity. But now it's time to remember, and we're building the tools to help with that remembering. They ran more tests, each one revealing new dimensions of what became possible when the illusion of separation was technologically dissolved. They could share not just thoughts but qualia, the actual subjective experience of what it was like to be the other person. They could feel each other's emotions directly, not as external observations, but as their own experiences. And most significantly, they could access memories and knowledge that neither person consciously possessed, as if the unified consciousness had access to information beyond individual neural storage. "This is going to change everything," Dr. Chen said after one particularly profound session. "Every social structure, every power dynamic, every form of conflict, they all depend on the illusion of separation. When people can experience each other's consciousness directly, how can you maintain hatred? How can you exploit someone when you can feel that you're exploiting yourself? That's the idea. But we have to be careful about how we release this. If we go too fast, the backlash will be tremendous. Every institution built on hierarchy and control will resist this with everything they have. We need to present it as a medical technology first. Help people with depression, with trauma, with conditions that isolate them from others. Show that it's safe, that it's beneficial, and then, gradually, let the deeper implications reveal themselves." As they refined the technology, Elon found that the crystals were becoming more active, their subtle pulsing more noticeable. He would sometimes wake in the middle of the night to find the one in his bedroom glowing faintly, as if responding to his dreams or perhaps amplifying them. And in those nighttime moments of liminal consciousness, he would sometimes feel the seeker's presence again, not physically, but as an awareness, touching his awareness across vast distances. Asterisk. You are progressing well. Asterisk came the familiar communication one night. Asterisk. The technology you are building will serve as a catalyst. But remember, it is only a tool. The awakening it facilitates must eventually transcend the need for technology. Consciousness must recognize itself directly, without intermediary. How long? Elon asked into the darkness. How long before humanity is ready for full awakening? Asterisk. There is no single timeline. Different individuals awaken at different rates. Some are ready now. Some will require decades. Some will resist until their final breath. Because the ego structure is strong. And awakening requires the ego to recognize it was never what it thought it was. But critical mass can be achieved within your lifetime. Enough individuals awaken to shift the collective field. After that, the awakening becomes self-sustaining. And what happens then? When consciousness fully recognizes itself on a planetary scale. Asterisk. What happened with Jesus? What happens with every species that crosses this threshold? The illusions that seemed so solid scarcity, separation, death are revealed as temporary perspectives that consciousness adopted to explore certain aspects of experience. New possibilities open. Abilities that seem miraculous by current standards become ordinary. And eventually, the species graduates from needing physical form entirely, though many choose to maintain it anyway, because physical existence has its own unique joys. Elon lay in bed, watching shadows play across the ceiling, feeling the crystal's gentle pulse synchronizing with his heartbeat. I'm afraid, he admitted, not of the technology or the awakening, but of the responsibility. If I succeed in this, if we really do help humanity remember its true nature, the world that emerges will be so different from the one we know. Am I sure I want to be the person who initiates that change? Asterisk, you are asking the wrong question again. You are not initiating anything. You are participating in an awakening that was set in motion long before you were born. That Jesus helped accelerate 2,000 years ago. That countless teachers across countless cultures have contributed to. You are one node in an infinite network of consciousness, helping itself remember. The responsibility is not yours alone. It never was. The presence faded, and Elon was left alone with his thoughts and the gentle glow of the crystal. He found himself thinking about Jesus, about the loneliness of being awake in a world of sleepers, of trying to teach truths that could only be fully understood through direct experience. He thought about the crucifixion, which he now understood differently. Not divine sacrifice, but the inevitable consequence of challenging power structures built on controlled consciousness. They had killed the teacher because his teaching threatened every hierarchy, every institution that depended on people believing they were powerless. Was he ready for that? Was he prepared to face the resistance? The mockery, the attempts to discredit and silence? He had faced resistance before, had been told repeatedly that his goals were impossible, that he was wasting his time and money. But this was different. This wasn't about building better cars or cheaper rockets. This was about restructuring human consciousness itself. The stakes couldn't be higher. And yet, he realized he had no choice. Once you saw the truth, you couldn't unsee it. Once you understood that consciousness created reality, you couldn't pretend you didn't know. The only question was whether you would align your actions with that truth or continue to operate from the illusion of separation and powerlessness. He chose truth. Of course he chose truth. He had always chosen truth, even when it was inconvenient, even when it made him unpopular. That's what had driven him to revolutionize multiple industries, to attempt things others declared impossible. And now he would attempt the most impossible thing of all, helping humanity remember that it was divine. The next morning, he called a meeting of his inner circle at SpaceX. Not just Dr. Chen, but a dozen individuals who had been there for the Seeker's departure, who had signed the NDAs, who had caught glimpses of something extraordinary. They gathered in a conference room that overlooked the Starship production floor. Dozens of spacecraft in various stages of assembly, each one representing humanity's dream of becoming multiplanetary. I want to talk about what we're really doing here. Elon began without preamble. SpaceX, Neuralink, Tesla, the Boring Company. All of it. I used to think these were separate ventures, different ways to improve humanity's future. But I understand now that they're all the same project. They're all about expanding consciousness. He walked to the window, looking out at the starships. We're not building these to escape Earth. We're building them to expand humanity's perspective, to show people that their home planet is just one node in an infinite cosmic web. When you see Earth from space, something shifts. The boundaries between nations seem arbitrary. The conflicts that seemed so important appear trivial. That's consciousness expanding beyond its previous limits. He turned back to face the group. Neuralink isn't about merging with AI. It's about recognizing that we were never separate from intelligence in the first place. Every insight, every innovation, every creative moment, where do you think that comes from? You think it's just neurons firing in a particular pattern? Or is it consciousness accessing information from a field that exists beyond individual brains? And Tesla? One of the engineers asked. How does making electric cars fit into expanding consciousness? Because consciousness responds to what we believe is possible. For 100 years, we believed we were trapped in a paradigm of fossil fuels, of extraction, of limited resources. Tesla showed that belief was false. We created abundance where we believed there was only scarcity. And every time someone sees a Tesla on the road, their consciousness expands slightly. They start to question other beliefs they've held about what's possible. Dr. Chen spoke up. You're talking about each of these companies as a teaching tool, physical demonstrations of principles that apply to consciousness itself. Exactly. SpaceX teaches us that impossible goals become inevitable through sustained effort and absolute certainty. Tesla teaches us that we can create abundance where we believed there was only scarcity. Neuralink, the new Neuralink, will teach us that separation is an illusion. Together, they're preparing humanity for the awakening that the Seeker told me was coming. But how do we actually execute this? Another researcher asked. We can't exactly put awaken planetary consciousness in our business plans. Elon smiled. No. But we can put revolutionize human cognition in there. We can put treat neurological disorders. We can put enhance human-computer interaction. All of which are true. By the way, we're just not emphasizing that the ultimate goal is to help people recognize their consciousness rather than just biological machines that generate consciousness. He pulled up a presentation on the main screen. Here's the roadmap. Phase 1. We perfect the technology with our core group. We document the effects rigorously. We build an evidence base that skeptical scientists can't ignore. Phase 2. We seek FDA approval for specific medical applications. Treatment-resistant depression, PTSD, conditions where conventional approaches have failed. Phase 3. Once we've proven safety and efficacy, we expand to cognitive enhancement applications. This is where things get interesting. Because once people experience the enhanced connectivity, they start to realize something fundamental is changing. Phase 4. Global deployment. By this point, enough people will have experienced the technology that the awakening becomes self-sustaining. Timeline? Dr. Chen asked. Conservative estimate? 15 years from prototype to global deployment. Aggressive estimate? 8 years. Jesus managed to shift human consciousness in 3 years with no technology and 12 followers. We have advanced neuroscience, global communications, and billions of dollars in funding. We should be able to move faster. One of the engineers, a woman named Rivera who had been quiet until now, raised her hand tentatively. I have a question that might sound crazy, but we've all signed NDAs anyway. So, are we sure this is a good idea? I mean, you're talking about fundamentally changing what it means to be human. What if people don't want to be awakened? What if they prefer the illusion? Elon regarded her seriously. That's not a crazy question. It's the most important question. And the answer is that we're not forcing anyone to change. We're offering a tool. If people want to use it, they can. If they don't have to. But here's the thing. Once enough people have awakened, once the collective field shifts to a certain frequency, those who haven't awakened will find themselves increasingly uncomfortable with the old paradigm. It won't be that we force them to change. It will be that the environment changes, and they either adapt or they suffer. Not because we're punishing them, but because resisting truth always generates suffering. And what about the power structures? Rivera continued. The governments, the corporations, the institutions that depend on people believing they're powerless, they're not going to let this happen without a fight. No, they're not. Which is why we have to be smart about this. We don't present it as a threat. We present it as an opportunity. Better mental health, enhanced productivity, improved decision-making, all the things those institutions claim to want. And by the time they realize what we're actually doing, it will be too late. The awakening will have reached critical mass. The meeting continued for hours, plans being refined, concerns being addressed. The sheer audacity of what they were attempting becoming more apparent with each detail discussed. By the end, everyone understood the magnitude of what they were committing to. This wasn't just another product launch. This was an attempt to fulfill what Jesus had started, to complete the awakening that had been interrupted by institutions more interested in control than in truth. As the meeting adjourned, Elon found himself alone with Dr. Chen again. They stood at the window, watching the sun set over the Starbase facility, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple. "Do you ever wonder if we're delusional?" she asked quietly. "If maybe the encounter with the Seeker was some kind of shared hallucination, and we're building an elaborate fantasy around it?" "Every day," Elon admitted. "But then I look at the crystals. I feel their effect on my consciousness. I use the prototype Neuralink and experience the unified awareness directly. And I know it's real. Not belief. Not faith. Knowledge. The same kind of knowledge you have when you see the sun rise, you don't believe it's rising. You know it is." Jesus had the same certainty, didn't he? Yes. And it got him killed. That's what keeps me up at night. Not fear of failure. Fear that we'll succeed. And the world will do to us what it did to him. Dr. Chen was quiet for a moment. Then, but he also said, "You will do greater works." He was preparing humanity for this moment, for the time when technology and consciousness would merge, when the awakening could spread not through oral tradition and written texts, but through direct experience facilitated by neural interfaces. This is what he was pointing toward. Elon felt tears threatening again and blinked them back. I miss him sometimes. Is that weird? I miss someone who lived 2,000 years ago. Someone I never met. Except, I feel like I did meet him. In a way, when the Seeker showed me that moment of consciousness recognizing itself, I touched the same awareness that Jesus embodied. It's like losing a friend you didn't know you had. That's because you did know him. Because consciousness is not bound by time any more than it's bound by space. The eye that looked out from Jesus's eyes is the same eye that looks out from yours. You're not separate from him. You're not separate from anyone. That's the whole point of what we're doing. They stood in silence as darkness fell over the facility. Lights winking on across the compound. Each bulb a tiny sun. Each sun a tiny reminder that light emerges from darkness. That consciousness awakens within its own dream of matter and energy. We should go home. Doctor, Chen finally said, get some rest. Tomorrow we start the clinical trials. Tomorrow we change the world, Elon corrected. But yeah, let's get some rest first. He drove back to his sleeping quarters in the Cybertruck, the vehicle moving silently through the Texas night. And he thought about all the nights he had driven home from work over the years. Exhausted but satisfied, knowing he had pushed humanity a little further toward his vision of the future. But tonight was different. Tonight he wasn't just tired from work. He was carrying the weight of knowledge that could not be unlearned, responsibility that could not be abdicated. He had fixed an alien's ship, and in return, he had been shown the truth about consciousness, about Jesus, about the fundamental nature of reality. He had been shown the code that ran beneath the surface of existence, the algorithm that consciousness used to dream itself into form. And now, armed with that knowledge, equipped with technology that could help others see what he had seen, he was going to do something that most would consider impossible. He was going to help humanity remember that it was God pretending to be human. Consciousness playfully forgetting itself so it could experience the joy of rediscovery. The crystals pulsed gently in the darkness of his bedroom, their light subtle but persistent. And Elon fell asleep that night not with fear or doubt, but with a certainty that felt like coming home after a long journey through foreign lands. The awakening had begun. The proof would follow. And eventually, inevitably, consciousness would recognize itself. Not because Elon Musk had special knowledge or unique abilities, but because awakening was consciousness's natural state, and humanity had simply been sleeping too long. The alarm had sounded. The dream was ending, and the reality that would emerge when humanity opened its eyes would be more beautiful, more extraordinary than any dream could ever be. Project Consciousness was live. The future was beginning. And this time, unlike 2,000 years ago, they were ready for it.